39. I told my Amish husband I was pregnant. He asked who else already knew. The kitchen was warm the evening I told him. I remember that clearly. The way the wood stove had been burning since mid-afternoon. The way the air sat heavy and close around us. The way the smell of supper clung to everything even after the dishes were washed and put away. I was 23 years old, and I had been carrying this particular secret for 11 days. 11 days of counting, of certainty growing into something I could no longer talk myself out of rehearsing the words in my head while I hung laundry, or swept the porch, or lay very still beside my husband in the dark. I had imagined this moment many times. I had imagined his face opening into something soft. I had imagined him reaching for my hand across the table. What I had not imagined was the pause. He looked at me for a long moment, not with surprise, not with joy, not with any expression I recognized as belonging to the man I thought I had married. He looked at me the way a man looks at a door he expected to find locked, and has just discovered standing open. And then he said, very quietly, "Who else knows?" Not, "Are you certain?" Not, "Praise God." Not even my name. Just those 3 words, delivered in a voice so controlled, it felt like a hand pressed flat against my chest. I did not answer him right away. I stood there with a dish towel still folded over my arm, and I understood, not all at once, not completely, but in the way that cold water moves through you before you have registered the temperature, that something was wrong. Not with the baby, with the question. To explain why those 3 words frightened me the way they did, I have to return to the autumn I was 19 years old. To the first Sunday I ever saw Eli Mast, standing at the edge of the churchyard, turning his hat slowly in both hands. To the community I had grown up believing was the safest place on earth, and to the particular way that safety, in our district, had always belonged more completely to some people than to others. My name is Sarah. I am 51 years old now, and I live quietly, and I have not set foot in that district in more than 26 years. I tell this not to invite sympathy, but because the distance is the only reason I can speak plainly. Some truths require time the way a wound requires air. You cannot rush either one. I grew up the second of 5 children in a household that was, by every outward measure, orderly and devout. My father farmed. My mother kept a home that was spotless in a way that felt, even as a child, slightly urgent, as though the cleanliness itself was a form of prayer, or perhaps a form of defense. We did not discuss our troubles beyond the family. We did not discuss our troubles much within the family, either. What we discussed was duty, and gratitude, and the importance of not placing oneself above the community. I understood those lessons completely. I believed them, in the uncomplicated way that children believe what they are given, before they have anything to compare it against. The person I want you to understand, the girl I was at 19, was not naive in the way people sometimes assume when they hear the word Amish. I was observant. I was careful. I had watched my older sister Ruth move through her own courtship and marriage 2 years earlier, with a quiet efficiency that left no room for romantic expectation, and I had filed that observation somewhere practical inside myself. What I was, more than anything, was eager to be chosen. Not by Eli Mast specifically, I did not know him yet, but by the life that choosing implied. A home of my own, a legitimate place inside the community's structure, the particular dignity that came, in our district, with being a wife. I want to be honest about that, because it matters. I walked toward that marriage with my eyes open enough to see what I wanted to see. The rest I arranged very carefully not to look at. Eli was 28 when I met him. He was from a family that had been in our district for 3 generations. His grandfather had helped establish the original congregation, and that history carried a weight I felt before I fully understood it. The Mast name meant something. It meant land, and standing, and a kind of quiet authority that moved through the community the way groundwater moves, invisible until you need it, and then completely determining. He was not unkind during our courtship. I want to say that clearly, because it would be easier, perhaps, to tell this story if he had been. He was attentive in precise, calculated ways. He remembered small details, that I disliked the taste of anise, that I was afraid of horses that showed the whites of their eyes, that I preferred hymns in the lower register. He asked my opinion on things and listened to my answers with an expression of genuine interest. What I did not notice, because I was not yet equipped to notice it, was that he never acted on my opinions. He asked. He listened. And then he did exactly what he had already decided to do, as though my perspective had been a courtesy extended, rather than information received. My mother liked him very much. My father approved. Our bishop, a man named Reuben Troyer, who had known Eli's family since before Eli was born, spoke warmly of the match at a gathering I was not present for, a detail I only learned about much later, and from the wrong person. We married in November of the year I turned 21. The ceremony was at my parents' home, because that was our tradition. The morning was cold and clear, and I wore a dress my mother and I had sewn together over the previous 6 weeks. And I felt, standing in that room surrounded by everyone I had ever known, that I was precisely where I was supposed to be. I was not wrong about the feeling. I was wrong about what the feeling meant. The first year of our marriage was not unhappy. It was managed. Eli organized our home with the same quiet authority he brought to everything else. There were ways things were done, ways I was not explicitly forbidden from questioning, but that existed with such settled confidence, they became their own kind of wall. Supper at a certain hour, visits to my family on a schedule that Eli determined, letters from my sister Ruth read, folded, and left on the kitchen table, in a way that made clear he had seen them before I had. I told myself this was orderliness. I told myself I had married a responsible man, and that responsible men maintained structure. The thing I kept returning to, quietly, in the parts of my mind I did not fully examine, was the way Eli spoke to his mother. Her name was Miriam. She was a small, still woman with pale eyes and a manner of entering a room as though she had already decided everything that would happen in it. She and Eli spoke in short, complete sentences. Efficient, like people who have already had the longer conversation elsewhere. She visited twice a week. She and Eli sometimes spoke quietly in the barn or on the porch, while I finished preparations inside, and when they came in together, something had always been decided. Nothing dramatic. Small things. Whether we would attend a particular gathering, whether a fence on the eastern field needed replacing before spring, whether a certain family in the district was or was not to be visited. I asked Eli once, lightly, what he and his mother discussed on those long porch evenings. He looked at me with that particular expression of his. Pleasant. Closed. Like a window that appears to be open because the glass is clean. Community matters, he said. Nothing that concerns the household. I accepted that. I noted it, and set it aside, and went back to the kitchen. That is the thing I most want the younger version of myself to understand. Setting things aside is not the same as resolving them. You can build an entire life on top of unresolved things. They do not disappear. They become the foundation. By our second year, I had begun to understand something about the way information moved in our household. It moved toward Eli, and then stopped. It did not, in any reliable way, move back toward me. This was not a rule I could have pointed to. It was more like a pattern that revealed itself slowly, the way a stain reveals itself on fabric that you have been washing too gently for too long. My sister Ruth told me in a letter that she was unwell. Something with her lungs. Nothing immediately serious, but enough that she had spent 2 weeks resting. I did not receive that letter until Ruth had already recovered and written a second one saying so. When I mentioned it to Eli, he said the first letter must have been delayed by the post. He said it with such complete reasonableness that I spent 3 days almost believing him. Almost. There was also the matter of the church meeting I was not told about until the day after, the one at which several families in our district had discussed, among other things, a woman from a neighboring community who had left her husband. I learned about it from the deacon's wife at a quilting gathering, and when I mentioned it to Eli that evening, there was a fraction of a pause before he said he had thought I already knew. He said that often. I thought you already knew. It is a very clean way to make someone feel as though the gap in their understanding is their own failure. In the 3rd year of our marriage, I became pregnant. I knew before any official confirmation was possible. My body told me in the quiet, certain way that bodies tell such things. And for 11 days I moved through my ordinary life, carrying this knowledge the way you carry a lamp through a dark house. Carefully, with both hands. afraid to set it down. I was happy. I want to say that without apology. Whatever I was beginning to understand about my marriage, whatever I was not yet willing to name, I was genuinely, uncomplicated happy about this child. I felt, in those 11 days, something close to hope, the particular hope that a new life might reorganize everything around it into something more generous than what we had built so far. On the 11th evening, I waited until the supper dishes were finished. I waited until the kitchen was quiet, and the wood stove had settled into its late evening warmth. I waited, I realize now, because some part of me understood that the telling of it would change something, that the information, once transferred, would no longer be mine in the same way. I told him, and he looked at me with that clean, unreadable expression, and he said, "Who else knows?" I told him no one, that I had told no one, that I had wanted him to be the first. He nodded once. He said that was good. He said we would tell people when the time was right, and that until then, I should not discuss it. He said the last part the way he said most important things, quietly, without edge, in a tone that made the instruction feel like reasonable advice rather than a command. I have spent a great deal of my adult life learning the difference between those two things. At 23, inside that kitchen, I could not find it. I asked him when the time would be right. He said he would let me know. That night I lay awake for a long time. The question he had asked me, "Who else knows?" had arranged itself in my mind in a way I could not dismiss. It was not a question about privacy. I understood privacy. In our community, careful timing around announcements was not unusual. Families sometimes waited to share news until after certain milestones, certain seasons, certain approvals. But his question had come before any of that. It had come in the first seconds, before joy, before prayer, before he had even moved from his chair. And something in the precise, immediate quality of it told me that his concern was not about waiting for the right time. His concern was about who had already spoken. I began, in the weeks that followed, to pay a different kind of attention. I watched the way Miriam looked at me when she arrived for her Tuesday visits. There was something in her gaze during those first weeks that I can only describe as assessment, the way you look at a situation you have been monitoring and are now checking against your expectations. She asked after my health, with a specificity that went slightly beyond courtesy. She asked whether I was sleeping well, whether certain foods were sitting comfortably. She did not ask whether I had news to share. She already knew. I understood that within the first 10 minutes of her first visit after my announcement, she already knew, and she was checking the shape of what she knew against the reality of me standing in my own kitchen. The question was how. I thought about it for 3 weeks before the answer came, and it did not come from anything Eli said. It came from something he did not say, a gap, an absence, a moment in which the wrong name was not mentioned. Our midwife, a woman named Hannah who served most of the families in our district, had come to the house for what Eli told me was a routine household visit, the kind of community wellness check that midwives in our area performed. This was not unusual. Hannah was a known figure, a trusted one. She had brought most of the children in our district into the world, including Eli himself. She sat with me for perhaps 40 minutes. She asked questions. She was warm and thorough and professional. And at the end of her visit, before she left, she said, simply, as though it followed naturally from everything else, that everything looked very healthy. I had not told her why she was there. I had assumed Eli had explained the purpose of the visit. I had assumed it was a general wellness check. It was not until 2 days later, turning the conversation over and over, that I understood. Hannah had already known I was pregnant before she walked through my door. She had performed a confirmation visit without my knowledge that it was a confirmation visit, and the only person who could have told her, the only person who had known long enough and who spoke to Hannah regularly through the midwifery arrangements our community maintained, was Miriam, which meant Eli had told his mother before the dishes were even dry on the night I told him, which meant the question he had asked me, "Who else knows?" had never been about protecting the news. It had been about making sure I had not told anyone first. I did not confront him immediately. I am not proud of that, but I am honest about it. I spent another 3 weeks assembling what I knew. I thought about the letters from Ruth, delayed or intercepted. I thought about the meeting I hadn't been told of. I thought about those porch conversations with Miriam that resulted in household decisions I learned about after they were made. I thought about the clean, pleasant way information always traveled toward Eli and never quite reached me. And I thought about the fact that I was carrying a child, and that in our district, the life available to a woman with a child was considerably narrower than the life available to a woman considering her options. I went to see my mother. I told her, sitting at her kitchen table with the same wood stove smell and the same close air, that I was struggling. I chose that word carefully, struggling, because it was true, and because it was also small enough that I thought she might be able to hold it. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said that marriage required patience, that men carried responsibilities I might not fully appreciate, that Eli came from a good family and had a good name, and that these things mattered, that they were a kind of protection even when they did not feel that way. I asked her if she thought a husband should be the first to know when his wife told him something, if that knowledge should stay with him before going anywhere else. She looked at her hands on the table. She said, "Sarah, some things run on rails you cannot see." It was the most honest thing she said to me that day, and she did not mean it to be. I drove home with the knowledge that I would not be helped from within. Whatever I did next, I would do alone, or not at all. What I did was speak to Hannah. I asked her, in plain language, who had contacted her about my pregnancy. I told her I was not angry. I told her I simply needed to understand. Hannah was a careful woman, but she was also fundamentally decent. She looked at me for a long moment across her front room, and then she said that she received her instructions from the family, and that she had always understood the family to include the husband's mother in matters of this kind. I asked if this was common, if other women's prenatal care was arranged without their knowledge. She said, after a pause that answered the question before her words did, that it depended on the family. I thanked her. I walked back to my wagon. I sat for a moment in the cold with my hands folded in my lap, and I let myself understand, completely and without argument, what kind of arrangement I was living inside. My pregnancy had been confirmed, communicated, medically attended, and managed, all before I had finished telling my husband the news. The question he had asked me had been, in its own way, a test. He had wanted to know if I had found a channel he hadn't accounted for. He had wanted to know if I had told someone outside the structure he and his mother maintained. And because I hadn't, because I had done exactly what I was supposed to do and come to him first, he had allowed himself to look satisfied, just for a moment, just long enough for me to recognize it for what it was. My daughter was born the following summer. She was healthy and loud and entirely herself from the first hour, and I loved her with a completeness that reorganized everything I thought I understood about my own capacity. I named her after my grandmother, a choice I made without consulting Eli, in the particular way that I had learned certain small things could be done, if they were done quickly enough, and with enough quiet certainty that there was no useful moment to object. He did not argue. The name stood. She is 30 years old now. She has her own children, and she knows most of this story. And she asked me once, thoughtfully, not unkindly, whether I ever wished I had left sooner. I told her what is true, that I left when I was able to, that the when of it was determined by a great many things that were not simple, and that I do not spend much energy now rearranging the past into something I could have managed better. That particular habit is expensive, and it purchases nothing useful. What I did leave with, eventually, was clarity, the kind that takes years to build and requires you to stop explaining away the things you have already noticed. Eli's question on that warm kitchen evening was not the beginning. It was the moment the pattern became undeniable. Every letter read before it reached me, every meeting attended without my knowledge, every decision settled before I entered the room, every piece of information about my own life that traveled to other people before I had finished speaking it. He had asked who else knew because, in the world he had built inside our marriage, he was supposed to know first, always, not out of joy, not out of protectiveness, but because knowledge was the mechanism through which he maintained the particular order he required. I had walked into that kitchen thinking I was giving him something. I had not understood, until that pause, until those 3 words, that he considered it already his. I kept one thing from that kitchen, from that whole life. A small cloth square, a piece of the dress I had worn to our wedding, cut away when the dress was eventually remade into something more practical, as our tradition held. My mother had done the cutting, and she had handed me the scrap without ceremony, the way she handed me most things, as though sentiment was a luxury that needed to be kept small. I have it still. I am looking at it now, on the table beside me. For a long time it meant the day I married Eli. The cold November morning, the full room, the feeling of being exactly where I was supposed to be. Now it means something different. It means the girl who stood in that room and did not yet know that being chosen and being seen are not the same thing. It means the distance between who she was and who I had to become to survive the years between. It means the daughter who carries my grandmother's name, because I was fast enough, once, to claim one small thing before anyone else could arrange it differently. I do not hate Eli. He was taught, by everything and everyone around him, that the people in his care were part of a structure he was responsible for managing. He believed that completely. He never questioned it because nothing in his life had ever required him to. That does not make those years small. It does not make that question small. But I have learned that understanding why someone harmed you, and forgiving them for it, and releasing yourself from the harm, are three entirely separate tasks. You can accomplish one without the others. You can accomplish none of them. The sequence and the decision belong only to you. The square of cloth is worn thin along one edge where I have folded it too many times. I will probably keep folding it. Some things you carry not because they are light, but because setting them down would mean pretending the weight was never real. It was real. I was there. And now, finally, so are you.